Hi, I'm Christopher Ward. I'm the author of a book called Is This Live? Inside the Wild Early Years of Much Music, the nation's music station. And any moment now, I'll be speaking with Mr. Media.
I'm Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You can see, hear, and read more than 1,000 of my previous celebrity interviews at MrMedia.com. That's MRmedia.com. Subscribe to the show on YouTube, iTunes, Apple News, Google Play, or Stitcher, and please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. On today's show, I'll welcome songwriter, sketch comic, Canada's first VJ, and now rock historian Christopher Ward. His first book is an oral history of the Canadian music video channel called Is This Live? Inside the Wild Early Years of MuchMusic, the nation's music station. Stick around. What I don't know about the Canadian music video scene could fill a half an hour or more, as rock and roll historian Christopher Ward is about to discover. Ward has published a charming new oral history of MuchMusic, a Canadian take on MTV for my clueless fellow Americans. The book, Is This Live? Inside the Wild Early Years of MuchMusic, the nation's music station, takes us behind the scenes at the creation of the Video Music Network, where the only rule was, you can do anything you want on air, just don't spend any money. Canadian music stars of the 1980s who blew up around the world, thanks in no part to MuchMusic, included Bryan Adams, Corey Hart, and Loverboy. And it also made local guitar heroes out of Platinum Blonde, Gowan, The Spoons, and Glass Tiger. Now, unless you're a native of the Great White North, you're probably wondering what Ward's connection to all of this might be, right? Well, he was Canada's first VJ, or video disc jockey. But unlike the American counterparts of MuchMusic, who pre-recorded all of their patter between music videos, pre-recorded I should say, Ward and his cohorts worked live. Now, Ward got his start as an entertainer as a member of Second City Touring Company, where he became friends with someone you might have heard of, future SNL comedian Mike Myers. And he was also Myers' sidekick on the original Wayne's World, long before Dana Carvey brought life to Garth. He has also written songs for Diana Ross, Winona Judd, the Backstreet Boys, and Alana Miles, for whom he wrote the #1 hit, Black Velvet. Christopher Ward, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thank you, Mr. Media. It is my pleasure to be here. Nice introduction, by the way, and hello, St. Pete's.
Hello. Have you ever been down here?
Oh, yeah. I used to come down every year to watch the Blue Jays train in Dunedin. I'm a huge baseball fan, so.
Excellent. I thought it was a pretty safe bet that a Canadian who'd been around had been to St. Pete in this area.
Yeah, we tend to flock about this time of year.
I was expecting you. I was wondering if you were going to mention George Thorogood, whose picture managed its way into your book, was a mainstay at St. Petersburg spring training for years. Almost didn't matter who the team was.
Right, because he's a ball fan. That's right. Because
Yeah.
wouldn't he and his band members play like media teams when they were on tour and stuff?
Yep, they'd play media teams. They always did a gig in St. Pete during March, and you could always see him in the stands. Whether it was the Cardinals, the Mets, even when the Rays were first getting started, they were
The old Al Lang Stadium?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good old.
Know it well.
Well, yeah. So before we really get started, I feel the need to kind of qualify my end of the conversation by acknowledging to everyone watching that I have never watched a minute of MuchMusic here in Florida. It's not available for the most part, but so I may not do justice to the vast oral history of the channel that you put together, and I want to be honest about that.
Thank you. No problem whatsoever. We'll fill in all the blanks.
All right. So tell folks, for starters, folks particularly south of the border here, who may not be familiar with MuchMusic, what it was like on a daily basis and how it was different from MTV, because it was not MTV.
Well, MTV had come in 3 years earlier before Much got the license. It's a much more laborious process getting a broadcast license in Canada, I think. At any rate, when we started, I think it was largely a budgetary constraint. I mean, we didn't have a set even. What you saw on TV were the offices. So there was constant ringing of phones, people going back and forth. You'd see camera people and producers and floor directors and tape operators and everything all in this one room. It was full on chaos all the time. And in fact, as a VJ, you had to get used to the idea of just keying in on one person, a floor director, and when they would say, 3, 2, 1, up to you, you'd have to be ready if you could hear them. But the liveness of it was the beauty of it and was the charm of it, because it's like improv comedy. People love to see you fail and then figure out how you're going to get out of it. That was really the magic, I think, and the artists responded to it fantastically. So we had a great time.
And how long would a shift be? Would you work 6 hours, 4 hours?
4-hour shift, yeah.
And the show was, the station is 24 hours?
Well, originally they did blocks of 8 hours, and then they would repeat them twice more. So, yeah.
Okay. And from what I always understood about MTV, the VJs there would go in and they'd record all their bumpers, all their, whatever term you prefer, they'd record everything back to back to back to back, which they could probably do in an hour or two for the day, and maybe they would do a whole week's worth at one point. And they were done. They weren't around live. They weren't commenting on anything going on. They had a studio. It was very different, right?
Well, they eventually embraced that storefront studio, which was the look of MuchMusic with TRL, the Total Request live show. But I think before then, most of it was pre-recorded. I'm guessing it was scripted. I don't know. I wasn't there. We had no researchers, no help whatsoever. You just brought what you brought. But also the VJs on Much were drawn from different backgrounds. There were actors, musicians like myself, comedians. It wasn't just you'd move straight from being a radio broadcast person into an on-camera position. So it was a totally different vibe there.
I think one of the VJs in your book one of the women talked about that she was already working like 8-hour days. And I don't know if it was for a TV station or whatever.
Yeah.
And they wanted her to suddenly be a VJ on MuchMusic. And she was like, I can't do anymore. I'm already overworked. And she said, and they said, well, you tell the story. You know who I'm talking about.
Well, her name is Lori Brown, and actually she has a radio show called The Signal on CBC, which is a national program that still runs. And she's a brilliant person and a good friend. She was doing a show called The New Music, which was it was syndicated all over the world. I don't know how much people saw it in the U.S. It was kind of a very journalistic approach to music. It started in 1979, and she was one of the co-hosts of that show. And then our boss came and asked her to be on Much, and she was like, "Oh my God, you got to be kidding! I'm in the clubs every night, going out and seeing bands. I'm shooting stuff. Because when you were on-air talent in that building, whatever show you were doing, you did it all. I mean, you would go out, you prepare and research all of your own interviews. You do the re-asks where you swing around and ask the questions again so that they could assemble it afterwards. You would literally do what we called a paper edit, where you would screen it, write down on paper where you saw all the edit pieces to go. So it was very, full on when you did that job. But what he told her was, he was like, "Oh, don't worry. You'll just be sitting in your chair working on a story for New Music, and the camera will come up and go 3, 2, 1. You'll swing around, introduce a video, and then go back to work." So, to say that the expectations were not high might be an exaggeration, but I think in reality it was more just that they knew that it didn't matter how much responsibility they gave us. We were so engaged in what we were doing that we were going to try to do a great job no matter what.
And Lori, correct me if I'm wrong, Lori had an interesting relationship with David Bowie.
Yeah, the first time he came into Much, she did the interview, and they just hit it off. In fact, there's a funny moment in the interview where he'd actually met her once before in Europe, I think at a festival. And he swings the interview around and he goes, "So Lori, how's your tour been going since we met last?" And she's like, she just plays right along with it. "Yes, it was Paris, I believe, wasn't it?" And just the kind of silliness that went on all the time there.
And later there was another thing with her where he was performing, right?
Yeah, he was at a festival again in the U.S. somewhere, and there was the usual bank of cameras, and he swung around and he spotted one with a Much logo on top, and he looked at the camera and went, "Hi, Lori." She said that it made her life.
Oh my God! I mean, wouldn't that be great? And
Yeah,
obviously, we're
yeah.
all even more nostalgic for Bowie now that he's passed. But so I read that and I went, wow, what a great story to be able to tell your children and your grandchildren and what have you.
We've lost so many people that I wrote about just over the course of the last year before the book came out. It's astounding.
Yeah, it just blows your mind. There was another woman who I really thought was interesting uh, to read your description, Erica M. Right?
Hmm.
Now she, I know and I'm trying to put this in perspective for American fans of MTV. The original five VJs there, each, you had JJ, who was the African American, kind of very low key guy. You had Mark Goodman, who was the typical FM DJ. Nina
Right,
Goodman was the late night, smoky voice. And then you had Martha Quinn, who was just kind of a
right,
goofy, didn't seem to know much of anything, quite full of
right.
herself. And then, so at Much, you had Erica M, who, from what I'm gathering, was not the most naturally telegenic person, was not the most comfortable speaking, but someone in management just had this idea about her, right?
Yeah. Well, the joke is, and it's a joke that's true, is that she was in the background of the shot as the rest of the staff were. She was answering phones, and so you'd see her a lot of the time. And, I mean, Erica was a very attractive young woman at the time. I mean, she still is. She's a beautiful woman. But the people would phone in and go, "Well, who's that? Who's that girl over J.D. Roberts' shoulder? Yeah, who's that?" So eventually they thought, well, why don't we just put her on air? That's what they did. I mean, one of the people I worked with, Simon Evans, who was a VJ there for a while, he was a producer. I mean, he was a producer at age 22. It was just like, yeah, you do it. And then a couple of the VJs left, and they hadn't hired somebody new. So they had this idea, well, why don't we try out some of the crew members? And they immediately went to Simon because they said, well, you're always like critical of everything everyone else does. You do it. And it was like, okay. So he went on air, and his first show, he says he didn't have anything like wardrobe wise to wear. He just wore an old band T-shirt. He didn't want any makeup. His hair was askew. He stutters a bit. And they gave him an interview with Stuart Copeland.
Jeez. Wow.
His first day of work. Yeah. But that's the way we...
There were no hair bands available that day, huh? They had to go right to Stuart Copeland,
No,
the drummer for the drummer for the Police.
That's right. There was a spandex shortage happening, Bob. Who knew?
Wow.
Yeah.
Now you were the first. You were literally the first VJ at Much Music. You were the first on air. Tell people. I thought this was fascinating, and I've read the explanation. I've heard you describe it. I still don't understand it. Tell people. MTV, the first video was the Buggles. Video killed the music. The radio star. What was the first video on Much Music when it hit the air?
It was called Snappy Songs. And it was by an artist. Oh, now you know what? I'm blanking on the name. UB Blake.
Right.
He was an artist from the 20s, maybe into
African
the
American
30s.
Pianist. Wonderful
Yeah.
guy. I mean, great,
I
incredibly
mean, it was
talented.
just post-silent movie era stuff. But they did a bunch of sort of music videos of him performing with a partner, and they're charming and really interesting. If you want to look at UB Blake, Eubie Blake, they're fascinating and they're of great historical interest. Not what you might think to launch a music network with. But that was our boss. He was a bit of an iconoclast, to say the least, and that's what he wanted to do. And we all went, yeah, sure. His name was John Martin, and as somebody said in the book, it's like, yeah, if John said we had to go into a burning building to get a better shot, we lined up. So, now we immediately followed it with the world premiere of Rush's Enemy Within. So we didn't completely lose the plot there, Bob.
No, but it was an interesting first choice.
Yeah. And by the way, I share the honor of being the first VJ on Much Music with a gentleman named, at the time he was known as J.D. Roberts. To Americans, he's known as John Roberts, formerly of CNN. He was on CBS News as an anchor.
That guy,
And
really?
That guy, yeah, he's a fantastic broadcaster. He's now,
sure.
I believe he's in Florida, and working for Fox. And he's, to this day, still a terrific broadcaster. But he was my partner in crime in the early days of Much.
Oh my goodness! No, I did not. You know what? I read and I did not make that connection. That's really interesting.
He
Um,
interviewed Bono for some big world event, and he had a picture, the two of them, from an interview they did back in the day, and they compared mullets.
oh wow. Wow. So let's go back on your history a little bit. Mike, I want to point out Mike Myers wrote the introduction for your book, and I
Yeah.
saw that and I thought, okay. Before I knew anything about your background, I thought, oh, so all Canadians do know each other. I mean, where did Mike Myers come from? But then I read, and I mean, tell folks a little bit about how it is that you and Myers cross paths, and you sort of, well, go ahead. I'll let you.
Well, we were both in the Second City Touring Company. I mean, you're familiar maybe with SCTV?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the people that came from Second City, both in Chicago and Toronto, I mean, going right back to Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi and Gilda Radner and that era, all the way through to the current ones, came out of that Second City comedy organization. But originally they have a kind of a strata where you're in a touring company to start, and you spend a lot of hours in the back of a van traveling all over the place doing gigs for shoe salesmen and just whatever they can find for you. Anyway, Mike and I became really close buddies, and then he went on to do the main stage in Toronto. I went on to help launch MuchMusic, and we stayed friends. We hung out all the time. And then when I had a hit record with Alana Miles, I moved to LA. It was right about the time that he broke with Wayne's World, so we were hanging out a lot. And then when he did the Austin Powers pictures, he asked me to be in the band. So there is a band called Ming T, and we're in the first and third pictures. And if you can spot me wearing the wig and the yellow turtleneck, good on you.
Now I'm going to look because I have the VHS versions in the other room, so I will look. I will look.
Yeah.
But now you kind of condensed that history a little bit. Didn't I read that you two had both auditioned the same year? He got in the first year, you got in the second year. Is that right?
Actually, bizarrely, it was the other way around.
Oh, is it? Okay, I'm sorry.
We auditioned against one another. They'd seen us both in a workshop program they had, and they asked both of us to audition. And then they hired me. And I was stunned because I'd seen Mike's audition, and he was clearly brilliant. I mean, he was 17, but he owned the stage. And what he was doing was so special, so unique. And I went up to him, as he recounts in the foreword, and said, Mike, I don't understand. They should have hired you. And, he just put it down to me being gracious. But no, I was just being honest. Shortly, a little while later, I guess a few months later, they had another person leave the touring company, and he indeed did get hired. So it all worked out in the end.
But you guys spent time together in the back of vans, traveling across Canada, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was like being in a band together.
Now, but he was unique in that he was always prepared, and I gather that you were never prepared.
Well, it's exactly the opposite. What happened?
Did I read the right book? Did I get this all
Yeah,
backwards?
exactly. No, you read the mirror image.
Oh my God!
Bizarro version of the book.
So,
well, what happened is, he calls me the entertainment survivalist because I'd done a few things, right?
Yeah.
And he always said that we would go on the road, and that I was prepared. I'd bring a sandwich, and I'd have a cold beer stashed in the van because it was always cold. And, I'd have music to listen to, and I was kind of ready to cope with being on the road because I played in bands for years, right? So I kind of knew the drill. And as he says in the foreword, I took pity on him and brought an extra sandwich, an extra beer, and a splitter for the extra headphones.
That's
and
right.
we both loved The Clash. That was the biggie. So.
And you know why I have it backwards in my head is because I forgot. I was reading, he wrote the introduction and told that story, and then in my head I reversed it because I was thinking.
Yeah, he wrote the foreword, exactly.
Yeah. So know now, for sure that I read the material. I just couldn't remember who wrote that part.
I'm guessing that you read a lot of material for your job. So please, fear not. I understand.
It's possible I might read 2 or 3 or maybe 4 books in a week. Yeah. So, but that was really interesting. And then, all right, then you tell did I get it right in the introduction that in the early versions of Wayne's World, what became known as Wayne's World, you were involved in that long before it ever got to.
Well, it wasn't called Wayne's World, but Mike had been doing this character in the touring company called Wayne, and I would sometimes do scenes with Wayne, where I'd be like a school principal and Wayne was sent down to see me, or just like whatever we came up with on that particular occasion. And so then when I got the gig, it actually was an all-night video show in Toronto, which was kind of a prototype for Much. And they gave me this gig doing Friday and Saturday nights from midnight till 6 in the morning with like no oversight and
No budget.
No budget. Yes.
That comes across really clear in the book.
Very clear. It was made very clear to us. So I said to Mike, why don't you come down and do Wayne? And we were like, yeah, let's do Wayne. And so the idea was that he was my cousin and he would come down and would just completely disrupt, but that I owed him a favor because he bailed me out of a fight or something. So I had to let him on the show. And he would come in and play with the equipment. He actually crashed a couple of interviews, which was really funny because there'd be like some pop star sitting there and Wayne would be there like just all over the guy, right? Like, so how do you do that diddle 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 thing on the guitar, man? Would you show me? So it was, yeah. But and he did a bunch of other characters too. He and I had this thing we did. We called it the Double Deckers. Yeah, a couple of fat guys, on our first tour of North America. Yeah, it was all right. And so, it's you do your homework. I mean, even if you're not consciously thinking about it, you're building stuff. It's like building song ideas. You collect little bits and pieces, and whatever sticks stays with you, and then you hopefully use it at some later date.
Sounds like
how's that for tying all things together?
No, that's good. That's good.
All right.
Sounds like if you're gonna make a friend, Mike Myers was a pretty good friend to have.
We just had a great time together, and he's a wonderful guy, and he's extremely loyal to his friends, and he's kind and deep. He's a great guy. I can't say enough about him.
Well, tell me about this. The title of the book. Is this live? It just sounds like a throwaway. Is this live? It's like somebody says it's live. But there's actually a wonderful anecdote that goes with that, right?
Well, it's one of those things that we heard often. In fact, I remember when a couple of the people from MTV came to visit, I think downtown Julie Brown and somebody else, and they walked in the Much Studios, took one look around and went, is this live? It was just, to them it was unthinkable that you could work in a setting like this. I mean, it was really like working in the middle of a construction site, with 10 pneumatic drills all going at the same time. But actually, I was interviewing LaToya Jackson.
Like of all people.
Well, we interviewed a lot of people. That was a great thing. We had so much freedom. It's like if I remember if Phyllis Diller was in town for something, and I just said I want to have her on my show. They're like, yeah, sure. So Phyllis Diller came on for an hour.
Wow.
And I didn't know what to do with her because there wasn't anything related to music. So we just walked all over the building, and I introduced her to people. And she, of course, is a brilliant improviser. She would have something sweet and funny and odd to say to every person she met, and it filled an interview. It was great. But with LaToya, she had a career as a musician, as you know. She had music videos and so on. Mm-hmm. She had that sort of breathy, that kind of Jackson voice. And we were sitting underneath a vintage fire bell. This is a very old building, and it went off, of course, in the middle of the interview. And the crew looked at me like, you want me to go to video? And I'm like, no, let's just wait and see what happens. So we're sitting there, and it's like bang, 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 over top of our heads, and I see this deer in the headlights expression, and she goes, "Is there a fire?" Is this live? I said, So somebody came over and put a big leather jacket on top of the fire bell. So it went from the clang, 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 clang to the, and we finished the interview. So that's my LaToya Jackson story.
It's great. It's great because I just you're seeing the title of the book. I went, is this live? Okay, that seems like an obvious question. But then to find that LaToya Jackson kind of inspired the title, I thought that was.
She doesn't know, I don't think, but maybe she will now.
Maybe she will now. I don't know. I've referenced a couple times that the philosophy of Much Music, certainly in the early days, was just that: do anything you want, which clearly you did, but don't spend any money. That was pretty. I mean, that was clearly it. Did that ever change while you were there, or was it always? Did it always?
No.
No.
No. No, we never had any money. I mean, there was money to go and shoot things. I mean, we went and covered, huge events, whether it was like Glastonbury in England or, well, I covered Live Aid, and the station was only 7 or 8 months old at that time. And we got to go do Live Aid in London. And that was spectacular. So it's not that there was no money whatsoever, but they were just saying, whatever you want to put on air, figure out a way to do it on a shoestring and make the most of it. But I mean, it's a cliche to say it, but it's true that when you work within a lot of tight restrictions, whatever those restrictions may be, you get creative because you have to. And often good things happen. I mean, look at SCTV. If you've ever seen their early shows, it's like held together with paper clips and tape, And as a result, it's great. It's the funkiness of it that makes it so funny.
Can you think of some examples of things that you did on the cheap over the years?
Well, I mean, just even where we would shoot, we'd be desperate to find somewhere to shoot. So we'd go up on the roof or something. I remember when Robert Plant came, they had this great idea. Oh, we'll do it up on the roof, because it's Robert Plant. We got to make it special. It's like, oh, okay. So then they had this idea that the Honey Drippers record had just gone gold in Canada. They were going to present him with a gold album. So one of the producers decided to play the part of a bike courier delivering this gold record, which was all wrapped up, and a bottle of champagne. So he comes up on the roof and he rides across the roof on his bike and then puts his brakes on when he comes up to the interview set where J.D. Roberts and Robert Plant are sitting. But unfortunately, he skids and it's all stones on the top of the roof. And there's a 6-story drop-off, and he nearly goes over the edge. But to his credit, I mean, he's literally it looks like a sheet. And he carried on and did this whole thing where he pretended to know who J.D. Roberts was, but not Robert Plant. He's like, hey, I've seen you on TV, man. It's like just, dumb stuff. We went to the basement. We had it was an ancient building. We went to the sub basement, and there was this old boiler, and we used to like shooting the metal show down there, and they would hang chains and so on. And I didn't do the metal show except one time. Whoever did it was sick, and they asked me to fill in. I'm like, yeah, sure. So we got a guest? They're like, yeah, Motorhead is your guest today. I thought,
wow.
I can handle a Motorhead interview. I mean, I'm not that versed in metal music, but their Motorhead are cool. So it was Filthy Phil and Lemmy, and they each had a 26er of something under their chairs, and they were going to co-host the show. So, the show went on and on, and needless to say, it sort of deteriorated as the 26er diminished and the time passed. And then at the very end of the show, we had this gigantic life-size poster of the band to give away. So I'm setting this thing up, and then they decide while I'm trying to give it away to come in and eat the poster. So, and you can actually see this because if you go to the MuchMusic website, I think it's just muchmusic.ca, I'm guessing. They have this little digital hub called Is This Live, after my book, and they've put like 50 sort of great moments from the early years of Much, and that is one of them, and it's worth taking a bite out of it. So
that sounds good. I will check that out.
I think you'll enjoy it, and you'll get a sense of what we actually did.
I will definitely enjoy that. I was telling you before we started that while you were starting at Much Music, I was a music critic and writer for the St. Petersburg Times and later the Tampa Tribune here in Florida. And so I have a lot of interviews that I did with artists from that era. I found the audio. I have found the audio from my interview with Billy Idol yesterday, and I'm gonna post that soon. But it's interesting in that we didn't have the resources to do interviews the way we do now, and no one was planning on hearing these interviews. So Billy Idol comes on the phone, and I say, I open with, Billy, how are your pants? There's a pause. My pants? I said, yeah, your manager said that you were having trouble getting into your leather pants or they were torn or some such thing. Oh, and it's just like, okay, that's the way we're starting this, huh? It's just like, you know,
Gorilla style, man. You would have been perfect on Much. You should
yeah,
have been there.
uh, may not be too
Yeah.
late. I may be chased out of here anytime. Um,
Oh,
and tell me about the interaction between Much and particularly Canadian acts, because uh, in the United States, two things were sure on MTV. Very little in the way of African American music getting played. Michael Jackson was the big breakthrough artist, but and Prince, but really there wasn't much more. In Canada, interesting, and I may not describe this well, but Canadian rules are such that you have to play on radio and I assume on Much a certain amount of Canadian artists. So it was a great launching spot for Canadian bands, right? I mean, did they appreciate that?
I mean, Much was just like manna from heaven for Canadian acts in those days. I mean, we'd had these regulations since 1967 on radio called the Canadian Content Regulations. We had to play about 30% Canadian music. There's different ways to sort of make up whether the song is Canadian or not. It could be produced by a Canadian or produced in Canada or written by a Canadian, different ways. But radio, kind of fought that because they felt they were having to play, inferior music, particularly at the beginning of the regulations, because the Canadian business wasn't built up to the extent that they had the budgets to make records that could compete with what was going on in the US and the UK. That eventually changed, of course. But when Much came in, we embraced playing the Canadian artists, and we looked upon them as like partners. I mean, we wanted to be partners in making their careers happen. Whether it was Martha and the Muffins or, Glass Tiger you mentioned, or Corey, Adams, all those people, Jan Arden at the beginning of their careers. It was great for us to stand up for them and help them get a foothold, because I mean, you figure that there's a lot of geography in Canada when you're in a band. You got to cover a whole lot of territory before you can go out there and find some fans and build a loyal following. But when you get a video and it goes on Much, it's instant national exposure. And suddenly the touring possibilities were huge. The ability to sell records, jumped in leaps and bounds. And I think in some respects, the growth of the industry followed all of that opportunity. Dollars will follow opportunity, I think, and that's what happened.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the format of the book. It's basically an oral history. You come and
Yes.
go throughout the story to kind of help the narrative along, but you've interviewed a lot of your former coworkers,
Yeah.
bands and stuff. What was that process like? I'm assuming you haven't written a book before. But correct me if I'm wrong.
I've written a few books of fiction,
Oh,
but this was the first time trying to do something nonfiction. Um, it was fantastic. It was just kind of like one big, long high school reunion. Because I had stayed in touch with these people over the years. I kept my friends from Much, even though I moved to Los Angeles in 1990. I stayed in touch. And so it was easy to make contact with people. And with the artists, I think because they knew me not only as the guy who'd been on Much back in the 80s, but they also knew me as a songwriter who'd had some success. That opens a lot of doors conversationally. So it was real easy to talk about the music. And it's a very nostalgic time for people. I mean, the 80s you look upon as a kind of time of innocence. The era that I write about is sort of framed by punk on one side and grunge on the other, two, fairly dark, aspects of popular music. Whereas the 80s, it was, the Eurythmics and Boy George and, Tears for Fears and all that kind of stuff happening. So people were eager to recall that time. It was also, for a lot of them, where their careers launched. And they have very fond memories of getting things going. And Much was, we were like partners in their career building process.
I just remembered a thing from the book. Nirvana was another band that made it into the Much Studios, right?
No, that was a trip that we did. They sent Erica to Seattle.
Ah,
I think it was, and looking at it, I think it was the Edgewater Hotel, because they're on a balcony with the water behind. And that, It's funny. People criticized Erica a lot, as we mentioned earlier in the this interview, because she brought kind of a fan's perspective to things. But actually, I think that was a huge strength for her. There was no hesitation to ask a question, whether it was like, somebody like Duran Duran. It's like, so how do you guys meet girls? I mean, okay, I wouldn't ask that question, but Erica did, and she got a great answer. And then when she was talking to Kurt Cobain, she's asking him about how his life has changed. And at one moment, there's this incredible, vulnerable exchange that takes place where he says, I used to really be angry all the time. I used to have this cliched view that how could you bring a child into a world like this one? He said, but when you meet somebody, when you're in love with someone and you have a partner, all of that changes. And when you realize that he was dead like 7 or 8 months later, it's just heartbreaking to see that interview.
Well, let's wind up on a happier note.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Kurt, I mean, God bless him, but yeah, Kurt Cobain. I wanted to ask you about Black Velvet, the song that you wrote for Alana Miles. How did that come about? And what can you tell us about, behind the scenes on Black Velvet?
Well, it came about because I was working at MuchMusic, ironically, because they asked me, because they knew I had this sort of thing about Elvis. It was just an ongoing joke. I just did a little Elvis Presley impersonation, you know what I'm saying? And so they said, well, it's the 10th anniversary of Elvis's death in '87, and we want you to go and do a story about that. I'm all over that. Great. They said, so what we're going to do is we're going to put you on a Greyhound bus with a cameraman and 40 Elvis fanatics, and you're going to drive from Toronto to Memphis. I said, what?
What the hell?
So that's what we did, and we kind of followed these people's experience through Elvis Week, which is what they call it on the anniversary. And they were the loveliest people. And it was really interesting to me. We ended up calling the show that came out of it Mecca in Memphis, because it was like a pilgrimage for these people, right? Anyway, needless to say, I had lots of time on my hands while I was on the bus. And I'm a note taker. Always got notebooks going, and that's where my sort of song bits and pieces find their way. And so I started gathering impressions of the South. And it was all of that when I got back home a week later, just wove itself into the song, paired with that classic old-time blues shuffle groove, the run, do, 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 do. I mean, it's like any songwriter, for the most part, if you're a guitar player, you sit there and you just play the same thing over and over again until the people down the hall want to kill you. And, eventually you find something in there. And then I had these little fragments of lyrics that I collected while I was on this trip. And, it all wove into one song called Black Velvet. And I'm really glad the day that I wrote that song.
And how did it wind up in Alana Miles's hands?
Well, easily. We were living together at the time.
See, I knew there was a connection, but I didn't know you were living together. Okay.
Yeah, we were a couple for many years. And in fact, she and Mike Myers and I all shared an apartment in Toronto in the beach area.
That sounds like a sitcom right there.
Well, yeah, it was a drama at times, too.
Well,
but
okay,
that's another
yeah.
story.
A dramedy.
She loved that song right from the moment that I brought it to her, because she loved doing that sort of sultry, bluesy kind of phrasing. And, she'd listen to Aretha and Tina and Mavis Staples and all that stuff. And so it was a natural for her.
Oh, very nice. That's a great story. I weighed whether I was going to ask you about it or not, and I thought, what the hell? Let me find out.
Why not?
Yeah.
Part of my story.
Good story. All right. Well, folks, listen. You can find Christopher Ward's new book, Is This Live? Inside the Wild Early Years of MuchMusic, the nation's music station, at great bookstores everywhere. North of the border, south of the border, online, whatever. Or you can order it right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. If you're watching this video on MrMedia.com, below the video you'll see the cover of the book. Click on it right now. You can download the ebook instantly, or you can have the physical book delivered to you via drone from Amazon in about 30 minutes.
Wow.
Maybe a little more in some areas where they don't use the drone. It's a secret drone. Don't tell anyone. Um, Christopher, you mentioned MuchMusic.ca, that there's a segment there for your book. Do you have a website? Are you Twitter, Facebook? How can people find it?
Yeah. Well, if you want to find more of what's the sort of content of the book, there's a site called Much Memories, and that's a Facebook page. It's also Twitter, and there's an Instagram as well. And there's tons of photographs, lots of ones which don't appear in the book, and stories, and yeah, even the artists jump in occasionally. I got Chris de Burgh's birthday wrong, and he Facebook messaged me and was like,
Ooh,
it was like,
sorry.
sorry. Yeah. So there's those, but I'm also at ChristopherWard.ca.
Excellent.
So you
Excellent.
can find me any number of ways, Bob.
Very good. Well, Christopher, I hope I didn't embarrass myself too much for a guy who has never seen a moment of Much Music, but I found the book fascinating. I mean, I really,
Oh, good.
it's you know, I grew up in that era. I was covering music. I was very interested. I'd been to MTV a few times, writing about them at the time, and I just thought, wow, this seems really interesting, and it's well told. I really recommend people check it out.
Thank you. I was curious to know if it was just a Canadian story, but of course, a lot of the artists that are in the book are international artists, and a good story is a good story. So hopefully, some of your listeners will like it.
I would hope so. I would think anyone who's interested in the artists from that era will find it very interesting. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Media, today.
Thank you, Bob. It was my pleasure.
Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of Alana Miles and Bryan Adams impersonators doing the safety dance in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida.
Hi, this is Rich Scheidner. And if you've ever wondered what it was like to be a stand-up comedian in the 1980s, I'm going to do you a big favor. Instead of billions of dollars for a time machine, you can just spend $24.95 and buy my new book, Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 1980s Comedy Boom. It will save you money and give you thrills. It will take you there. Go to my website, richscheidner.com, go to amazon.com, and buy this book.